All right, good day, good people. Today we wanted to talk about hyperinflation and de-dollarization and how it relates to Bitcoin. Without further ado, let's get right into it. First, I wanted to talk about reserve currency. We get a base of what the reserve currency means, and it'll help us understand further down the line as we dive deep into this. All right, a reserve currency is a foreign currency that is held in significant quantities by central banks or other monetary authorities as part of their foreign exchange reserve. The reserve currency can be used in international transactions, international investments, and all aspects of the global economy. It is often considered a hard currency or a safe haven currency. The United Kingdom's pound sterling was the primary reserve currency of much of the world in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. However, by the middle of the 20th century, the United States dollar had become the world's dominant reserve currency. The world's need for dollars has allowed the United States government to borrow at lower costs, giving the United States an advantage in excess of $100 billion per year. All right. So as it stands right now, the United States is the reserve currency. So the whole de-dollarization thing is a potential move from the United States being a reserve currency. And as we see, the United Kingdom used to be the reserve currency. Now it's the United States. So is the United States about to be a used to be? So let's tap into that and find out. First article I wanted to look into, right? Countries worldwide are dropping the US dollar. De-dollarization in China, Russia, Brazil, ASEAN. The global de-dollarization campaign is gaining momentum as countries around the world seeks alternatives to the US dollar. China, Russia, Brazil, India, ASEAN nations, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are now using local currencies in trade. So instead of those countries using the United States dollar, they're now using local currencies. The global de-dollarization campaign is gaining momentum as countries around the world seek alternatives to the United States dollar. China and Russia are trading in their own currencies. Beijing and Brazil have also dropped the dollar in bilateral trade. The UAE is selling China its gas in yuan through a French company. Southeast Asian nations and ASEAN are de-dollarizing their trade, promoting local payment systems. Kenya is buying Persian Gulf oil with its own currency. Even the Financial Times newspaper has acknowledged that a multipolar currency world is emerging. All right, let's read a little bit about some of these countries and the moves they're making. When Chinese President Xi visited Moscow in March, his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin revealed that 2/3 of the country's bilateral trade is already conducted in the ruble and renminbi. It is important that our national currencies are increasingly used in bilateral trade, Putin said. We should continue promoting settlements in national currencies and expand the reciprocal presence of financial and banking structures in our country markets. All right, so, they're trying to make their currency strong as opposed to the dollar being so dominant and all these other countries' currencies being trash. Like when you go there, the dollar is extremely dominant over them. It seems like they're tired of that and they're moving away from that. All right, the Russian leader added, "We support using Chinese yuan in transactions between the Russian Federation and its partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America." Chinese President Xi traveled to Russia where he pledged changes we haven't seen for 100 years. Both agreed to deepen economic integration and challenge the US dollar using yuan and other currencies in international trade. All right, so we got Xi and Putin pledging to use their currencies as opposed to the US dollar. So they're dumping the dollar. Just a week after Xi's trip to Moscow, China announced that it had for the first time used yuan to buy liquefied natural gas from the UAE. The deal was negotiated between the state-owned China National Offshore Oil Company and the French company Total Energies, meaning Europe's firms are now willing to conduct transactions in yuan. And we're talking about Europe, folks, who was supposed to be a big ally to America. French media outlet RFI described the trade as a major step in Beijing's attempts to undermine the U.S. dollar as universal petrodollar for gas and oil trade. So we have French media talking about Beijing attempt to undermine the U.S. dollar, and they're in line with it. The report quoted the chairman of the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange, Guo Su, who said the deal encouraged multi-currency pricing settlement across border payment. All right. People's Daily China. China first yuan-settled liquefied natural gas trade was completed on Tuesday through the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange, with about 65,000 tons of LNG imported from the UAE changing hands in the trade. So, they continue in business without the United States dollar. On March 30th, China and Brazil, the world's most populous and sixth most populous countries, announced they had come to an agreement to trade with each other on their local currencies, yuan and reais. China's media network reported the deal will enable China, world's second largest economy, and Brazil, the biggest economy in Latin America, to conduct their massive trade and financial transactions directly, exchanging yuan for reais and vice versa, instead of going through the dollar. It noted that China is Brazil's biggest trading partner, and in 2022, the two countries did more than $150 billion worth of trade. So we got Brazil and China doing big business with each other with no dollar in it, as opposed to the past. Brazil leftist president Lula da Silva has called for Latin America to develop a new currency for regional trade, which he calls the SUR. So we have Brazil, China, France, Russia, UAE, all these people all in the mix doing business without the dollar. It's happening. Brazil and Argentina are making plans for a Latin American currency to boost regional trade and reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar, the Financial Times reported. Lula, a co-founder of the BRICS, has pledged this while running for president. Now, if you don't know what BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America. I guess you can look at it as a new NATO or new World Bank. And the United States is really not a part of it. All right. Just 2 days before China and Brazil revealed their deal to trade in local currencies, the South American giant's former president, Dilma Rousseff, officially assumed her new role as chief of the New Development Bank in Shanghai. So the New Development Bank is a BRICS bank. So it's like a new World Bank as opposed to the United States World Bank. The NDB, commonly known as the BRICS Bank, was created by the bloc of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa as an alternative to the U.S.-dominated World Bank. Dilma, like her ally Lula, is a leftist from Brazil's Worker Party. In a speech that Geopolitical Economy reported on in 2022, Dilma analyzed the U.S.-China conflict as a rivalry of two systems, a struggle between neoliberalism and socialism. She condemned U.S. sanctions and the dollar and called for Latin America to break with the Monroe Doctrine. So she's calling out. She's like, look, South America, let's get away from this situation called the U.S. dollar. Countries in Southeast Asia are also de-dollarized. The finance ministers and governors of the central banks of the member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations met in Indonesia on March. So that's what ASEAN stands for, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. According to the news website ASEAN Briefing, at the top of their agenda were discussions to reduce dependence on the US dollar, euro, yen, and British pound from financial transaction and move to settlements in local currencies. So this is the dollar and all its allies, it seems to be. ASEAN is developing a cross-border digital payment system that will allow the use of local currencies in regional trade. ASEAN Briefing noted that Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines and Thailand agreed on this in November 2022. The media outlet added that Indonesia's central bank plans on creating a local payment system as well. So we're going to get to how this is going to affect us. And I mean us, people living in America, because everybody that's listening not living in America. And some of you guys in other countries could attest to what inflation does when it happens, hyperinflation, how it affects the everyday man and woman. But we'll get into that. Indonesia is the fourth most populous country on earth after the United States. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is meeting in Indonesia. Top of the agenda are discussions to reduce dependency on the US dollar, euro, yen, and British pound from the financial transactions and move to settlements in local currencies. So they tired of their currencies being trash. They trying to build their currencies up. And when you think about it, it's really a smart thing to do, right? Another Southeast Asian nation, Malaysia, is publicly advocating de-dollarization. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim met with Chinese President Xi in Beijing on March 31st, where the two leaders discussed plans to weaken the US dollar and create an Asian monetary fund. This is a frontal challenge to the US-dominated International Monetary Fund, which emerged from the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference that established the dollar as the global reserve currency. So I did a video called The History of the Dollar and Why Bitcoin, and we talked about 1944 Bretton Woods. 1944 is when all these countries came together and met in New Hampshire and came to the agreement that they're going to use the United States dollar as the world-based currency for all of international trade. It seems to me they're having a new Bretton Woods in another country and we're not invited. Anwar proposed the Asian Monetary Fund at the Baowu Forum in China's Hainan province. There's no reason for Malaysia to keep depending on the dollar, Anwar said in comments reported by Bloomberg. The media outlet added that Malaysia's central bank is developing a payment mechanism so that Southeast Asian country can trade with China using its own currency, the ringgit, right? That's the name of their currency. I hope I pronounced it right. China is open to talks with Malaysia on forming an Asian monetary fund, said Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, amid the world's growing impatience with the king's dollar dominance. So it looks like Xi has been meeting with quite a few nations, and they seem to be down with the plan, right? The Malaysian leader comments come just months after former officials in Singapore discussed what economies in the region should be doing to mitigate the risk of still strong dollar that weakens local currencies and become a tool for economic statecraft. It's like America sometimes uses that position on the dollar to impose will on other countries and impose will on how they do things and change what they do and the whole 9 yards. All right, so this goes on and on and on, right? I'll leave a link to this, but let me talk about this here. Several countries in Africa continent are advocating de-dollarization as well. In March, Kenya signed an agreement with state-owned companies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE to buy oil on credit using the country's local currency, the shilling. Kenya asks to do so because the African nation's dollar reserves are running low and it pays for more expensive imports. So Kenya started to buy petroleum products with their own currency. So it's like China and the UAE are like, look, we're going to accept y'all currency. We're going to build y'all currency up. You know, why y'all keep using the American dollar? Doesn't make sense, considering that Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. So these countries is looking at it like, why we keep accepting paper, which is not backed by gold, for natural resources. France is demanding that Europe cuts ties with the United States. So we'll read a little bit of this. France President Emmanuel Macron has demanded that Europe reduces its reliance on the United States and avoids getting dragged into confrontation between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. France's concept of strategic autonomy. Macron emphasized his pet theory of strategic autonomy for Europe, presumably led by France to become a third superpower. Speaking with Politico and two French journalists in his plane back from China, he said, the great risk Europe faces is that it gets caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevents us from building its strategic autonomy. He also highlighted his concern about growing tensions in the region that could lead to a terrible accident. Macron's comments came just hours after the China launched large military exercises around Taiwan, which China claims is its territory. Beijing has reportedly threatened to invade in recent years and have a policy of isolating the democratic island by forcing other countries to recognize it as part of one China. So China coming for that country, and France seemed to not want no part of it. I'll leave a link to that. When you read further, you'll see that the president of France had some harsh words as it relates to America and the dollar, which is kind of weird considering it's France, right? So moving right along, we have Kenya, an African country, folks. Kenya president tells citizens to get rid of holding of U.S. dollars as nations dump the dollar and begin to embrace Petrowan. So we got a country in Africa, right, telling his citizens, get rid of the dollar. Let's see what he said. I'm giving you free advice that those of you who are hoarding dollars, you shortly might go into losses. You better do what you must do because this market is going to be different in a couple of weeks. It is no secret that the U.S. dollar is becoming less and less valuable by the day, losing its purchasing power at a rapid scale, and with the clear divide that has been created between the East and the Western world due to the Russian-Ukraine war, many nations are growing sick and tired of the dollar and are now looking to dump it before it depreciates in value some more. All right, the Kenyan president went hard too. I'll leave a link in that in the description. We talked about BRICS. We know who they are, and it's like they added so many more countries, right? So BRICS have their own currency. Now this is in 2022. The other articles we covered are 2023. So we've came a long way. They actually made wave. So let's read a little bit about what they were planning to do last year, and we read about what they're already doing this year. With the global de-dollarization trend accelerating, the two assets that could stand to benefit are gold and the crypto space, according to analysts. Now we're going to tie into why Bitcoin is involved in all of this and later down the line. Earlier this summer, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are developing new basket-based reserve currency. The issue of creating an international reserve currency based on a basket of currencies of our countries is being worked out, Putin said at the BRICS Business Forum at the end of June. We are ready to openly work with all fair partners. The 5 countries are also trying to create an alternative mechanism for international payments. BRICS could also see its membership expanded with Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia considering joining the group. Now, we read in the previous articles that the UAE already doing business, so it's happening. This is not the first time something like this has been mentioned, with the BRICS countries already starting to incorporate more local currencies for payments and mutual trades. Over the summer, India and Russia have been holding discussions to accept each other's local rupee and mirror payment systems, according to the Deccan Herald. So in 2022, this article is saying what they're going to do, and we just read that they're doing it. Analysts see this new BRICS reserve currency proposal as an alternative to the U.S. dollar and the International Monetary Fund special drawing rights currency. One can only think this move is to address the perceived U.S. dominance of the IMF and will allow BRICS to build their own sphere of influence and unit of currency with that sphere, said ING Global Head of Markets Chris Turner. Russia's efforts to de-dollarize are far from new, but they have been accelerated following the Western sanctions placed on Russia after its invasion of the Ukraine at the end of February. The speed in which Western nations and its allies sanctioned Russia reserves, freezing around half, no doubt shocked Russian authorities. The central banks of Russia effectively admitted as much as no doubt some BRICS nations, especially China, took notice of the speed and stealth at which the U.S. Treasury moved, Turner pointed out. BRICS nations may therefore feel they need an alternative reserve currency to match something like the IMF. All right, so we're not going to go too deep into this, but I'll leave a link to that too. All right, so now for us living in America, we ask ourselves, could the dollar collapse? Key takeaways. A currency collapses when a country's currency loses all its value and becomes particularly worthless in a day-to-day use. This is generally a result of political or economic upheaval, hyperinflation, or war. So it looks like we might be heading towards hyperinflation, and we'll talk about that. It's not common occurrence, but we've seen it happen before in various places around the world. For investors, it's a risk to be aware of, though luckily it's fairly easy to protect yourself against it. While technically the US dollar could collapse, its backing from the largest economy in the world and its status as the global reserve currency makes that highly unlikely. Okay, you see that, right? Whoa, that's a big statement. If you're someone from Argentina, Venezuela, or Russia, you understand the realities of what can happen when your home currency fails. It's a big deal, and it can cause immense financial damage to the economy and individuals. Other countries already been through this, folks. You know, we haven't been through it because we had this dominant currency position, but it seems like we're losing that position. But it is actually realistic to think that the US dollar, the world's reserve currency, could collapse too. Look, well, cut to the chase. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. Nothing is in the world of money and finance. For investors, it's important to understand the potential outcomes that could impact their finances, even if they're unlikely. So in this article, we're going to walk through what actually happens when a currency collapses, how it impacts investors, and what can they do to protect themselves against it. What is a currency collapse? A currency collapse is when a currency loses all of its value. This might seem crazy, but it makes more sense when you consider that money is simply a IOU from the government. It used to be that paper money, coins, and even numbers on a bank statement represented an amount of gold in a reserve. It used to be, but in 1971, thanks to President Nixon, that's no longer the case. In those days, money represented an IOU for the amount of gold. Now the system isn't fully backed by gold, but the concept remains the same. Now they're backed by the weight of the United States, reflecting everything within the economy. These BRICS nations, they're backing their money by oil, gold, and resources. United States dollar is backed by the weight of the United States, reflecting everything within the economy. I don't really know what that means, so if you do, put it in the comments. So in order for a dollar to have value, societies need to believe that the United States has value. Given how many taxpayer, businesses, and valuable assets are in the United States, it's hard to argue that it doesn't have value. In fact, the reason why U.S. was able to move off the gold standard was because it has so much economic value. So a currency collapses when there is no longer any trust that the asset, country, or organization has sufficient value to reflect the currency. This can happen for a number of reasons. Hyperinflation. When hyperinflation occurs, every dollar becomes less valuable. $10 might buy you a 12 case of Pepsi today, and then tomorrow that same $10 only buy you 6 Pepsis. The currency's values becomes less and less, and this can create a spiral, ends up in it becoming practically worthless. We've seen this in Zimbabwe. So now you see why the Zimbabwe president was so thorough in what he was saying, because they already been through the pain. Germany already been through the pain. Venezuela been through the pain. China been through the pain. Countries have been through this pain, and they're not trying to repeat that. And some of them probably like, America, you're going to go through some pain. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. All right. Another reason why, political instability. While not something we expect to see in the U.S., governments can be overthrown. When there's a military coup or a war, another event resulting in political upheaval, a country's currency can often be a casualty. High debt. Many countries have high level of debt these days, but this is all relative to the strength of the underlying economy. When a country has very high debt and shrinking economy, this can cause a flight of assets and a collapse of the currency. So those are just a few examples, right? And we're not going to go into deep into all of this, but let's see what the bottom line is. The bottom line, currencies can and do collapse, but it's not a minor event. When a currency collapses, it's down to a significant economic or political event in a country that has a huge impact on its citizens. It's not likely outcome at all in most countries around the world, and that's particularly true for the United States. This is down to the U.S. dollar status as a global reserve currency. We're losing that status, folks. So while technically the U.S. dollar could collapse, the chances of this happening anytime soon are incredibly slim. All right. So they're saying the chances are slim because we're the world currency. But we just kind of covered that we might be losing that world reserve status. We just talked a little bit about hyperinflation. So we're just going to give a definition of hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is a term describing rapid, excessive, and out of control general price increase in the economy. While inflation measures the pace of rising prices for goods and services, hyperinflation is rapidly rising inflation, typically measuring more than 50% per month. If we're going to have hyperinflation happen and our money become useless, we need to have something in place just in case for we won't go haywire. Because in America, we already shooting people left and right. So just imagine if the money become useless. So here we have the Board of Governors and the Federal Reserve. So I wanted to talk about this right here. Federal Reserve announces July launch for FedNow service. Now, FedNow, everybody is calling it the Federal's Cash App, the government's cash app, which technically is a good way of putting it. So let's read right. The Federal Reserve announced that the FedNow service will start operating in July, providing details on preparations for launch. The first week of April, the Federal Reserve will begin the formal certification of participants for launch of this service. Early adopters will complete a customer testing and certification program informed by feedback from the FedNow pilot program to prepare for sending live transactions through the system. They got this going on now where it's a pilot where folks can get their money directly from the government as opposed to going to the banks, just in case the banks might crash, right? About the FedNow service. The Federal Reserve banks are developing the FedNow service to facilitate nationwide reach of instant payment services by financial institutions, regardless of size, geographical location, around the clock, every day of the year. Through financial institutions partnering in the FedNow services, businesses and individuals will be able to send and receive instant payments at any time of the day, and recipients will have full access to funds immediately, giving them greater flexibility to manage their money and make time-sensitive payments. Access will be provided through the Federal Reserve's FedLine network, which serves more than 10,000 financial institutions directly. All right, so this is a situation where they say they want to give us money quick, individually and businesses, right? So this would be the answer. If our money go to trash, this would be the answer, the FedNow service. So yeah, folks. So now I want to show you some pictures. Pictures is worth 1,000 words. So we mentioned some of these countries that have been through this hyperinflation. So I wanted to show you some pictures, because pictures is worth 1,000 words of what hyperinflation truly means. Because we had Germany, China, Zimbabwe, and other countries that have been through this. Our Venezuela. So let's get right into it. So this is the picture of a supermarket empty when hyperinflation came. This is a brother here holding large sums of Zimbabwe cash. That cash right there probably bought 2 loaves of bread. This is how much he had to carry down the street because the inflation is hyperinflation. This is a photo of hyperinflation. This photo depicts how much it costs for this amount of meat in a hyperinflation setting. So who gonna carry around all this amount of money just to buy some meat? I believe this is where FedNow comes in at, to eliminate that right there. Here we go again. This amount of money for this bread. All this money here, ain't no telling what this brother about to buy. This amount of money represents those tomatoes. You need this amount of money in this particular hyperinflation setting to buy this one turkey, one roll of toilet paper. And folks, you know, when we get crisis in America, toilet paper is the first thing people run to. $1 equals this amount of this South American currency. Folks, could we see this in a reverse, where all this is US dollars and one of these will be a Chinese yuan? Money in the trash, money on the street, just laying there, a money tree, and ain't nobody picking off of it. The money is rendered to useless. Look at these brothers. Big barrels of money. You probably can buy a pair of shoes with those barrels. Hyperinflation. Same brother here. Look at this young brother. Happy. All that money. I don't think he understands the impact of hyperinflation just yet. And look at this young brother. He's sitting here folding up money. But what he's making out of the money is great, because he took it and turned it into an arts and craft, and he's making money bags. You see? Bags made out of money. The money has been rendered useless. So what do? What did these hyperinflation countries do, most of them, to combat this problem? Now this brings me to Bitcoin. Merchants in these countries started accepting Bitcoin. As you can see, Bitcoin, pay here, Pizza Hut, Bitcoin, Subway, Bitcoin. This is the only way these businesses, I'm not going to say the only way, but this is one way these businesses attempted to survive. Look at this, Bitcoin. Acceptomos. Bitcoin. 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 You have a street vendor. Acceptomos. Bitcoin. Bitcoin, baby. And this lady here accepting Bitcoin. Now, she have Bitcoin Cash right there. I hope she's not accepting that. But Bitcoin Core, she do got that up there. Bitcoin. Once again, Bitcoin. So, all right, folks, we're going to do a quick recap. We talked about the reserve currency. Currently, the U.S. is reserve currency. We also talked about countries' de-dollarization, which essentially means they dumping the dollar. And of course, you got ASEAN, Asian, South Pacific countries, Brazil, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, France. We talked about those harsh words from the French president and the Kenyan president as it relates to the U.S. dollar. And you could dive more deep into that. We talked about BRICS nations. We talked about, they call it Putin's BRICS currency, but it's not Putin's currency. It's BRICS currency. You know, they got their own thing going on over there. Could the U.S. dollar collapse? We talked about that. We talked about hyperinflation. We talked about Fed Now service, which I believe is the answer to that hyperinflation if it ever happens. And then we looked at some images of hyperinflation. Right? And I think I might do a quick video with just the images. And then we talked about a potential answer to hyperinflation, which is Bitcoin. Now, this is not me saying it's the answer. This is me showing you that it was and is the answer in real life situations around the world where the country's currency was hyperinflated. And my favorite is this young brother here making these money purses. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Hit the like and the subscribe. If you get an opportunity, go over there and check out Crypto Shave Club. Leave some thoughts in the comments. Let me know how you feel about hyperinflation. What do you think? Do you think it's possible for the U.S. dollar to go that deep in hyperinflation? What are your thoughts on the de-dollarization? And I'm working on a couple more videos. It's just I want to make sure I bring you information, and I got to make sure I do research. So stick around. Got some things coming up. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Peace. Catch y'all on the next one.